She was called the most beautiful woman in the world. At 18, she became a queen. At 25, she lost everything. But this is not a story about a crown. It's a story about love that couldn't defeat duty, a woman punished for something she could never control, and a heartbreak that followed her for the rest of her life. The girl between two worlds. But long before the crown, before the diamonds, before the world learned her name, Soraya was simply a little girl caught between two worlds. She was born on June 22, 1932, in the ancient city of Isfahan, a place where history seemed to breathe through every stone and every winding street. Her father came from one of Iran's most powerful aristocratic families, a bloodline tied to influence, prestige, and political power. Her mother, however, came from a completely different world. German by heritage and European in spirit, she brought with her ideas that challenged tradition and embraced freedom. From the very beginning, Soraya belonged everywhere and nowhere. Part Persian princess, part European dreamer. While other children grew up with a clear sense of identity, Soraya moved between continents, languages, and cultures. One season, she was surrounded by the grandeur of Iranian family traditions. The next, she was walking through the parks of Berlin, speaking German, reading poetry, and imagining a future untouched by duty or destiny. Perhaps that was the first hidden tragedy of her life. Because when you spend your childhood between worlds, you often grow up searching for a place that truly feels like home. Those who knew her described a young woman of remarkable beauty long before the cameras arrived. But beauty was never the most interesting thing about Soraya. It was her quiet sensitivity, her intelligence, the loneliness she carried beneath the surface. As Europe drifted toward war and Iran wrestled with political uncertainty, Soraya learned a lesson most people never fully understand. Nothing lasts forever. Not comfort, not security, not even the places you love. By 16, she had attended elite schools in Switzerland, mastered multiple languages, and moved effortlessly through high society. To the outside world, her future seemed limitless, but destiny had already begun moving toward her. Thousands of miles away, inside the royal palaces of Tehran, powerful people were searching for a bride. A king needed a queen. A dynasty needed an heir. And soon, a single photograph would change the course of Soraya's life forever. The photograph that changed everything. Some lives are changed by decisions. Others are changed by accidents. Soraya's life was changed by a photograph. In 1948, she was 16 years old, living in London and studying English. Her days were ordinary by aristocratic standards. Language lessons, social gatherings, dreams about the future. She was beautiful, certainly, but so were many young women of Europe's upper circles. Nothing suggested that history was quietly moving toward her. Yet hundreds of miles away, inside the halls of Tehran's royal palace, a different story was unfolding. The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, needed a wife. His first marriage had collapsed. More importantly, it had failed to produce the one thing the monarchy desperately needed: a male heir. For kings, love was often a luxury. Dynasties survived on sons. And so the search began. Not for a soulmate, not for a partner, but for the woman who would secure the future of a kingdom. Royal advisors, family members, and court insiders searched through influential families, evaluating young women the way investors examine rare treasures. Bloodlines, education, appearance, reputation. Everything was measured. Then someone mentioned a young woman from the Esfandiari family, half Persian, half German, fluent in several languages, educated in Europe, and extraordinarily beautiful. A formal portrait was arranged. When the photograph finally reached the Shah's family, the reaction was immediate. The image seemed almost unreal. Those striking eyes, that quiet elegance, the rare combination of innocence and sophistication. The Shah's sister reportedly looked at the photograph and believed she had found exactly what the monarchy had been searching for: a rare pearl. Soon an invitation arrived. Soraya and her father were invited to Tehran. Officially, it was merely a visit. Unofficially, it was an audition for a throne. At 16, Soraya could not possibly understand what was happening behind the scenes. She believed she was traveling to meet a king. In reality, she was walking toward a destiny that would give her everything she had ever imagined, and eventually take almost all of it away. The King and the Dream. When Soraya arrived in Tehran, she believed she was stepping into a fairy tale. What she didn't know was that fairy tales often hide their price until it's too late. The palace was unlike anything she had ever seen. Vast marble corridors stretched endlessly beneath glittering chandeliers. Uniformed guards stood motionless like statues. Servants moved silently through halls lined with gold silk and centuries of royal history. For a 16-year-old girl who had spent most of her life moving between Europe and Iran, it felt less like reality and more like stepping onto the set of an epic film. Then she met him, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. He entered the room in military uniform, carrying himself with the confidence of a man born to rule. Yet beneath the polished image there was something else, something Soraya noticed immediately: loneliness. Power has a strange way of isolating people. The higher someone rises, the fewer people they can truly trust. And in that moment, the king and the young girl from Isfahan recognized something familiar in each other. Years later, Soraya would describe him as magnificent, not because he was a king, but because for one brief moment he seemed human. Their conversations came easily. The age difference disappeared. The royal protocols faded into the background. What remained was the intoxicating excitement of two people discovering each other against the backdrop of unimaginable wealth and power. For Soraya, it felt like destiny. For the Shah, it felt like hope. He had met beautiful women before, hundreds of them, but beauty alone had never captured his attention. Soraya possessed something rarer. She challenged him. She listened. She looked directly into his eyes instead of bowing before his title. And perhaps most importantly, she made him forget he was king. Only days after their first meetings, the decision was made. The Shah wanted to marry her. The announcement stunned everyone with its speed. One moment, Soraya was an unknown teenager studying in London. The next, she was preparing to become Queen of Iran. Looking back, it all happened with breathtaking velocity. Too fast for questions, too fast for doubts, too fast to recognize the shadows already gathering beyond the palace walls. Because while the world saw the beginning of a royal love story, history was quietly preparing a very different ending, and neither of them could see it coming. The Snow Queen. If their love story had been written by Hollywood, this would have been the perfect ending. Instead, it was only the beginning of the tragedy. The engagement made headlines across the world. Newspapers celebrated the young Shah and his breathtaking bride-to-be. To millions, they looked like the embodiment of a modern fairy tale, a powerful king and a beautiful young woman destined to rule beside him. But fate had one more test waiting. Just weeks before the wedding, Soraya fell gravely ill with typhoid fever. For days, her condition worsened. The future Queen of Iran lay confined to bed, burning with fever, while preparations for one of the most anticipated royal weddings in the world continued around her. There were moments when even those closest to her feared she might not survive. Yet somehow she recovered. Weak, fragile, thinner than before, but alive. Then came February 12th, 1951, the morning that would define her life. As Tehran awoke, something extraordinary happened. Snow began to fall. Not a few scattered flakes, but a heavy blanket of white covering the city. In a country where snowfall in the capital was rare, many saw it as a blessing from heaven itself. An omen, a sign that destiny approved of the union. Inside the royal palace, thousands of guests gathered beneath crystal chandeliers. Diplomats, kings, princes, politicians, and dignitaries from around the world filled the halls. And at the center of it all stood an 18-year-old girl. Soraya wore a magnificent Christian Dior gown, embroidered with thousands of silver details. Yet beneath the beauty lay a hidden struggle. The dress had been designed before her illness and was now far too heavy for her weakened body. Every step felt like carrying a mountain. Every smile concealed exhaustion. No one watching could see it. The cameras captured perfection. The reality was something very different. As she stood beside Mohammad Reza Pahlavi exchanging vows, snow continued falling outside the palace windows, transforming Tehran into something almost mythical. For the Shah, it was the happiest day of his life. For Soraya, it felt like a dream made of diamonds, applause, and promises. But history has a cruel habit of disguising warning signs as blessings. Years later, many would remember the snow as a symbol of romance. Others would wonder if it had been something else entirely. Because sometimes the cold arrives long before winter begins, and behind the glittering spectacle of that royal wedding, forces were already gathering that would slowly turn a fairy tale into one of the most heartbreaking love stories of the 20th century. The Palace of Cold Smiles. The wedding was over. The crowds had gone home. The snow had melted. And for the first time, Queen Soraya found herself alone inside the reality of royal life. What the world saw was a glamorous young queen living a dream. Newspapers published photographs of her dazzling gowns, her radiant smile, and her fairy tale marriage to the Shah. To ordinary people, she seemed to have everything. But palaces are strange places. Behind the gold, the diamonds, and the carefully staged photographs, they often hide wars no one can see. Soraya quickly discovered that becoming a queen was far easier than being accepted as one. From the very beginning, she faced a powerful enemy, the Shah's mother. Queen Mother Taj ol-Muluk had spent decades controlling the royal court and influencing her son's life. Like many women who had fought their way to power, she did not welcome another woman into her territory. To her, Soraya was not a daughter. She was a rival. The criticism came quietly at first. A comment about her manners, a remark about her European upbringing, a whisper about her German blood. Then came the Shah's sisters, who joined the growing chorus of disapproval. Every gesture was judged. Every word was analyzed. Every mistake was remembered. Soraya felt trapped inside an invisible courtroom where she was constantly on trial. And there was another problem. A man named Ernst Perron, the Shah's closest confidant, his advisor, his shadow. Soraya distrusted him almost immediately. She believed he manipulated the atmosphere inside the palace, turning people against one another, while maintaining extraordinary influence over the Shah. Whether her suspicions were entirely justified or not, one thing became clear: she was not the only voice competing for her husband's attention. the loneliness began to grow. Slowly, silently. Yet while her private life became more complicated, the outside world saw a different queen. Soraya traveled across Iran, visiting hospitals, charities, and orphanages. She connected with ordinary people in ways few royals ever managed. The public adored her warmth and sincerity. For many Iranians, she represented a modern future. But history was preparing another storm. A political crisis was brewing. The monarchy itself was under threat. And as pressure mounted around the Shah, Soraya would soon discover that loving a king meant carrying the weight of an entire nation on her shoulders. The fairy tale was fading, and the real test of their love was only beginning. The queen who carried a kingdom. As tensions inside the palace grew, trouble was spreading far beyond its walls. Iran was changing, and not everyone believed the Shah should remain at the center of its future. In 1951, a powerful political figure named Mohammad Mossadegh emerged as a national hero. To many Iranians, he represented independence and reform. To the monarchy, he represented something far more dangerous, a challenge. Suddenly, the battle inside the palace was no longer about family rivalries or court gossip. It was about survival. The Shah, burdened by enormous pressure, began to retreat into himself. Those closest to him described a man overwhelmed by doubt, trapped between competing forces he could no longer control. The king, who had once appeared so confident, now seemed increasingly isolated. And in one of history's great ironies, it was the young queen who appeared stronger. Soraya watched her husband struggle beneath the weight of the crown. While ministers argued and political enemies gathered strength, she refused to surrender to fear. Behind closed doors, she urged him to act, to lead, to fight, to remember who he was. Years later, critics would debate how much influence Soraya truly had during this turbulent period. But one thing is undeniable: she stood beside the Shah when many others were losing faith. Then came the crisis. In 1953, political chaos pushed the monarchy to the edge of collapse. The Shah fled Iran, uncertain whether he would ever return. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Pahlavi dynasty might disappear forever. And Soraya went with him. Not as a queen, not as a symbol, but as a wife. Together they waited in exile, watching events unfold from afar, uncertain whether the life they had built was already over. Then, almost unbelievably, everything changed. The coup succeeded. The Shah returned to Tehran victorious. The monarchy survived. The crowds cheered. The throne was saved. Yet victories often leave invisible scars. The political storm had passed, but another crisis was quietly taking shape, one far more personal, far more painful, and ultimately far more destructive than any threat posed by politicians or revolutionaries. Because while the Shah had regained his kingdom, there was still one thing neither power nor wealth could guarantee: an heir. And soon, the entire future of the dynasty would rest on the shoulders of one woman. A woman who had no idea that her greatest battle was about to begin. The heir that never came. For years, Soraya had helped the Shah save a kingdom. Now she faced a battle she could not win. And unlike politics, this enemy could not be negotiated with. It could not be defeated. It lived inside silence, inside hope, inside every passing month. At first, the questions came gently. Family members asking when there might be good news, courtiers smiling politely, friends offering encouragement. But as the years passed, the whispers grew louder. Where was the heir? Where was the son destined to continue the Pahlavi dynasty? Soraya wanted a child as much as anyone, perhaps more. She loved the Shah deeply, and she understood what was expected of her. Together they consulted specialists across Europe, doctors in Switzerland, experts in France, the finest medical minds money could buy. Test after test, treatment after treatment. Always the same disappointment. Nothing. The burden became heavier in 1954 when tragedy struck the royal family. Prince Ali Reza, the Shah's younger brother, and next in line to the throne, died in a devastating plane crash. Suddenly, the monarchy found itself in an unprecedented position. A kingdom without an heir, a dynasty balanced on uncertainty. And overnight, the pressure on Soraya became unbearable. No longer was she simply a wife struggling to conceive. She became the focal point of an entire nation's anxiety. The woman standing between stability and crisis. The woman standing between continuity and collapse. It was a cruel transformation, because no one asked how she felt. No one spoke about her heartbreak. Instead, conversations revolved around duty, succession, and the future of the crown. The language of power has always been ruthless. It measures people by what they can provide. And for the first time, Soraya began to understand a devastating truth. The world loved her beauty. The people admired her kindness. The Shah adored her. But if she could not produce a son, none of it might be enough. Behind the palace walls, an impossible question was beginning to take shape. Could a king choose love over a dynasty? Soon both Soraya and the Shah would be forced to answer it. And the answer would change their lives forever. Love or the crown? History often presents great rulers with impossible choices. For Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, that choice was no longer political. It was personal. And standing at the center of it was the woman he loved. By the late 1950s, the pressure surrounding the royal marriage had reached a breaking point. What had once been whispered behind palace doors was now openly discussed among ministers, advisors, and members of the royal family. Iran needed an heir, not someday, now. The Queen Mother had stopped hiding her frustration. Courtiers spoke openly about succession. Religious and political figures worried about the future of the monarchy. Everywhere the Shah turned, he heard the same message. A king without a son was a king gambling with the future. Yet the cruelest part of the story was this: the Shah genuinely loved Soraya. Even many of his critics acknowledged it. She wasn't merely his wife, she was his closest companion. The woman who had stood beside him during exile, political turmoil, and personal doubt. But love and power rarely obey the same rules. Desperate to avoid losing her, the Shah proposed a solution. Under Islamic law, he could take a second wife while allowing Soraya to remain queen. The arrangement would preserve their marriage while giving the dynasty a chance to produce a male heir. For some royal families, such a compromise might have been acceptable. For Soraya, it was unthinkable. She had not married a king to become half a wife. She had not sacrificed her youth, endured palace hostility, and stood beside him through crisis only to share him with another woman. She refused, firmly, unequivocally. And perhaps for the first time, love found itself standing directly against duty. The Shah delayed the decision for as long as he could. He searched for alternatives. He spoke of constitutional changes and possible solutions. But deep down, both of them already knew the truth. The clock was running out. In February 1958, Soraya left Iran for what she believed would be a temporary absence. Yet, as she packed her belongings, a strange feeling settled over her. Sometimes the heart understands what the mind refuses to accept. Somewhere inside, she already knew. she was not leaving her country. She was saying goodbye to her life. And soon, one of the most famous love stories of the 20th century would come to an end. The divorce that broke a kingdom. On March 14, 1958, the fairy tale officially ended. Not with a scandal, not with betrayal, not because they had stopped loving each other, but because love had lost a battle against history. From her parents' home in Germany, Soraya waited for news. For weeks she had clung to the hope that the Shah would find another solution. A constitutional reform, a political compromise, anything that would allow them to remain together. Instead, the announcement came. The Shah and Queen Soraya were divorcing. Across Iran, shock rippled through the nation. Many had expected tensions, few had expected the end. For ordinary people, the royal couple represented something rare, a marriage that appeared genuine. In a world of arranged alliances and political calculations, theirs seemed to be built on real affection. That was what made the separation so heartbreaking. Even the Shah struggled to hide his pain. Days later, during a public address, he reportedly fought back tears as he explained the decision to the Iranian people. He spoke of duty, responsibility, and the future of the nation. But beneath the official language was a simpler truth. He was losing the woman he loved, and Soraya was losing everything. At just 25 years old, she watched her identity disappear almost overnight. The crown was gone. The palace was gone. The future she had imagined was gone. Photographs of her were removed from public spaces. Her image vanished from school books. The queen who had once stood at the center of an empire was quietly erased from its official story. The Shah attempted to soften the blow. He provided her with a luxurious apartment in Paris, financial security, priceless jewelry, and every comfort money could buy. But grief cannot be compensated. Loneliness does not disappear inside a penthouse, and heartbreak cannot be hidden beneath diamonds. The world called her fortunate. The newspapers called her glamorous. Yet behind every photograph was a woman entering a new kind of exile. Not exile from a country, exile from the life she was supposed to have. And as Europe welcomed the former queen into its glittering high society, Soraya began a painful journey that would last the rest of her life. The search for happiness after losing the only thing she had ever truly wanted. The Princess of Sad Eyes. The world expected Soraya to move on. After all, she was young, beautiful, wealthy, free. At least that was the illusion. From the outside, her new life looked like something out of a European fashion magazine. Paris welcomed her into its glamorous circles. Aristocrats, actors, artists, and billionaires competed for a place at her table. Photographers followed her through cafes, galas, and exclusive parties from Saint-Tropez to Rome. Yet behind every elegant photograph was a woman carrying a wound that refused to heal. The crown had been taken from her, but it wasn't the crown she missed. It was him. The Shah remained an invisible presence in her life, lingering in memories she could never fully escape. Every grand ballroom reminded her of palace receptions. Every official ceremony echoed a life she once lived. Every newspaper headline about Iran reopened an old scar. Soon, European tabloids gave her a new nickname, the Princess with the Sad Eyes. And perhaps no title ever fit more perfectly. She tried to build a future. She dated influential men, wealthy heirs, famous actors, powerful figures from Europe's elite circles. The world watched each new romance with fascination, hoping to witness a second fairy tale. But fairy tales rarely happen twice. None of them could replace what she had lost. Then, unexpectedly, a new opportunity arrived. Film producer Dino De Laurentiis believed Soraya possessed something cameras loved. Not simply beauty, but mystery. The kind of sadness audiences instinctively wanted to understand. Soon she stepped into a completely different world. Cinema. For the first time since leaving Iran, she wasn't being asked to play a queen. She was being asked to play someone else. Anyone else. Perhaps that was the attraction. Acting offered an escape from reality, a chance to disappear into another story. And on a film set in Italy surrounded by lights, cameras, and dreams, Soraya would meet a man who seemed capable of doing something no palace, no fortune, and no title had managed to accomplish. He would make her smile again. For the first time in years, happiness appeared within reach. But fate had not finished writing its story, and once again, tragedy was waiting just beyond the horizon. A second chance, and a second tragedy. For years, Soraya had lived among ghosts. Ghosts of palaces, ghosts of lost titles, ghosts of a love she could never forget. Then almost unexpectedly, life offered her something she thought had vanished forever. Hope. While filming in Italy during the mid-1960s, Soraya met director Franco Indovina. He was not a king. He commanded no armies. He possessed no throne, no dynasty, no crown. And perhaps that was exactly why she fell in love with him. For the first time in her adult life, she was not being viewed as a symbol, not as a queen, not as a royal failure, not as the woman who could not produce an heir. To Franco, she was simply Soraya, a woman, a partner, a human being. Their relationship quickly deepened. Friends noticed a change in her. The sadness that had followed her across Europe seemed lighter somehow. The guarded smile that photographers rarely captured began appearing more often. For the first time since leaving Iran, she seemed genuinely happy. It was a different kind of love, quieter, warmer, free from the crushing expectations that had defined her marriage. There were no ministers discussing succession, no royal advisors calculating political consequences, no palace walls listening to every conversation. Just two people imagining a future together. Perhaps that was what made it so cruel, because tragedy has a habit of returning when happiness feels closest. On May 5, 1972, Franco boarded a flight bound for Sicily. It was supposed to be a routine trip. Nothing extraordinary, nothing memorable. The kind of journey people take every day without a second thought. He never arrived. His plane crashed during its approach to Palermo. Every passenger aboard was killed. Franco was 40 years old. The news shattered Soraya. Once again, the future disappeared in a single moment. Once again, the man she loved was gone. And once again, she found herself standing alone among the ruins of a life she had barely begun to rebuild. Some people experience one great heartbreak in a lifetime. Soraya endured two. After Franco's death, something inside her seemed to close forever. The woman who had survived exile, public humiliation, and the loss of a crown now faced an even more devastating enemy. Not politics, not destiny, but loneliness. And this time there would be no rescue, no second chance. Only silence.